Hello and welcome to my CSO-1500 final project, my cultivation plan. I am Mark Walter. Thank you for joining me today. I'm pretty excited to share this with you. We've been planning it for about, 7 or 8 weeks now. I've really got it all nailed down, I feel like, and I'm excited to share with the rest of the class. So over the next 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to cover indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, which media I chose for growing, supporting my target environment, lighting, and water, and in the environmental impacts. Also, propagation methods, seeds or clones, support for year-long growing, cultivation space, look and feel for veg, and then we're going to move on to flowering, which involves training, cycling plants, the harvest, more support for year-long growing, more cultivation space, look and feel for flowering, and then harvest, drying, and curing. Then we have choosing my genetics. I'm going to have 5 choices to start with, whether they're auto, photo, fem, or clone, and then updates that may be needed to my spacer cycle based on the genetics that I have chosen. Then we're going to move on to breeding plan. What am I breeding for? Plant crossing and trait identifications, initial cross, progeny, and back crossing, the length of time to perfect my perfect breed. And then finally, last but not least, we have my nutrient and fertilization plan. We're going to identify fertilizers used, fertilizer procurement, delivering my nutrients to my plants, and then tracking usage and plant response. So moving on to my chosen cultivation system, I'm going with indoor. I chose it because I already have some experience growing indoors. I've been growing for about 2 years here in Missouri with my medical card. Full control of the environment is really what I'm looking for. Pests can still be an issue. I've had to combat spider mites already in the past. I also realize this is probably the most expensive and least eco-friendly cultivation system, but I want to grow the best plants that I can, and indoor cannabis is going to beat the hell out of greenhouse or outdoor cannabis, in my opinion, any day. My choice of media is going to be potting soil. I'll probably use Mother's Earth TerraCraft. That's what I've used in the past. Got amendments and nutrients, so you don't need to feed your plants till about the 4-week point, and that's probably about the time you're going to push them to flower anyway, so you'll just follow a flowering feeding schedule, but we'll get to that more later. Probably one of the simplest to use, especially for a beginner such as myself. Here, hydro's legit, but I'm trying to cut costs where I can, and soil just seems like the most cost effective. I'm going to support my target environment mainly by using LED lighting. Good choice for lower operational costs, energy usage. I know they're going to cost me a little more up front, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. When I think of my target environment, I'm thinking a giant warehouse. I'm currently growing in a 4x8 grow tent for my cannabis plants. Obviously, in a commercial setting, the grow would need to be much larger. Lighting is going to have to be LED. In particular, I'm going to choose Vipar Spectra's P2500 LED grow lights. I've been using these in my tent and they work wonders. They are LEDs, so they're going to cut down on energy costs and consumption. They also only run about $200 per light, which will cover around a 4x4 area. I'm using 2 in my tent currently, and these things are powerful. I'm probably just going to use regular old tap water to water my plants with. It'll be pH to around 5.8 to 6.3, and I'll most likely have like a giant reservoir to store all my water in, so it reaches the correct temperature. I can pH it beforehand. Things like that to cut down on like time and labor. I realize that I'll be growing in an indoor environment, but I'm going to try and do whatever I can do for the environment. This is going to include things like using soil, which comes from the earth, so why the hell not? I feel like soil is going to have the least environmental impact. And then we're going to move on to my LED lights, which are going to cost a little bit more, but they're going to save on energy consumption, energy costs. I'm going to be paying Ameren like next to nothing for my light bill. And also, most importantly, probably the heat that they're going to cut down on. I can cut down on some fans, climate control, compared to HPS and metal halide, which are going to run much hotter, and they're going to increase temperatures in my environment. Lastly, we have water. We all know water's cheap. I'm going to get it all from the regular old tap. And then I'm going to store it in a reservoir. It'll be pH, like I mentioned. This obviously isn't environmentally friendly as maybe trapping rainwater or something, but it's going to be the simplest and probably the best way for my system. I just want to say seeds for the win. I have personally grown with both seeds and clones. I'm choosing seeds now, that I've learned some different propagation methods. Clones seem all fine and dandy, but you can lead to issues. My dad gave me some Afghan Kush Super Skunk clones, and they have been nothing but trouble. Introduced spider mites to my environment. I feel like clones would be easier, but nothing in life's supposed to be easy. I'd rather get a good feel of my genetics, the background, and then try different strains to grow. There's so many out there, you could never possibly grow them all. My experience pretty much consists of growing some hybrids and indicas. I haven't really dealt much with the sativas, although Green Crack is a sativa, and that's literally my favorite strain I've ever tried. My goal for the future would be to grow some sativas, obviously. Anything that's going to yield heavy and be high in potency, I'm pretty much game with. The idea of keeping a mother plant is really cool to me, but it's not something that I think I would do. I'm pretty much interested in trying to grow as many strains as possible throughout my lifetime. So I'd like to start over from seed basically for every grow. I'd be purchasing seeds for the next grow cycle while I'm already, flowering. I don't really have any intentions on breeding, although I will cover it a little bit here later. So my cultivation space is pretty much going to be like a giant freaking warehouse, man. It's going to include, a separate area for veg, a separate area for flowering. Then we'll have like a propagation station. I mean, if I'm trying to maintain 100 veg plants, how much space am I going to need, you think? Well, you see, with 100 plants, you would need about roughly 100 square feet of space based on 1 square foot per plant. That seemed kind of small. A 10 by 10 grow area does not seem large enough to keep 100 plants in the veg stage. I would probably dedicate closer to 2 to 3 square foot per plant. So let's just go on the high end of 3 for a total of 300 square foot of space needed for 100 plants. There's definitely going to have to be, areas for storage and, water. And I just can't even fathom how large of an area this is going to take since I've only been growing, at most 6 plants at a time. I'm going to mention LEDs again. They're going to cut down my operating costs. They can help with carbon footprint. They're going to be expensive, but they're going to pay for themselves. I'm going to be giving the electric company less money. I'm going to be producing some big buds. I'm pretty stoked about it. I've learned from my personal grow that with my Vipar Spectra P2500 LED grow lights in my 4x8 tent, I have 2 lights that covers the area well during veg and flowering. And based on these estimates, in order to maintain about 100 plants in veg, I would need probably around 25 of these lights, which is going to run me about $5,000 on Amazon to secure lighting for 100 plants. The lights go for $200 each, and I feel like buying in bulk, they would certainly provide a discount. This is probably going to be my highest expense for the grow, but the lights will be used for multiple grows. And with that being said, they're LEDs. The carbon footprint and energy costs will be minimal. I will obviously be flowering indoors, which is my chosen cultivation method. My plan is to grow a few large plants. I'm going to top these suckers, try and maximize my yields the best that I can. As I previously mentioned, I'm going to be starting from seed for every grow. This is obviously a little bit more time consuming. I'm only going to be able to harvest every, 12 to 14 weeks. In a good year, we're going to get about 4 harvests out of my grow space. I briefly mentioned using some high stress training of topping to maximize my yields. That's going to provide more bud sites, better airflow. It's really going to help increase my potency and my yield. We're going to be flowering at a 12-12 light cycle. That's pretty standard for photos. I'm not doing anything with autos, so I don't have to worry about that. Basically cycling plants from veg to flower and then veg to flower, and then, you see it so on and so on. I feel like my grow space is going to have to be pretty complex because I'm going to be starting from seeds every time, not using clones or anything. Basically a rough idea of how this is going to work. I'm going to have my flowering plants that I will harvest, and then I will immediately switch my veg plants to flower, and then I'll already have veg plants ready, and they'll be vegging, if that makes sense. My cultivation system will remain the same as, as in veg, except I'm going to have different rooms. A lot of large plants in 5-gallon pots, harvest every 12 to 14 weeks, which I mentioned already. 30%-ish of trichomes become cloudy or amber. That's when I'm going to pull them up, dry in a large room with some fans, and maintain a healthy environment for the best possible smoke possible. And then we're going to cure in mason jars. It's pretty simple. We're going to burp those every day for about 15 minutes per day for the curing process. We're going to do that for about 2 weeks until our cannabis is ready, and then we're going to really see those terpenes shining through. The smells, the aromas, the taste, it's going to fill the room. Now is the time I think we've all been waiting for. What is Mark going to grow? Well, here we go. Blue Dream, Grape Ape, Green Crack, Redbeard's Runts, and UK Cheese. All of these will be photos which will be purchased from Captain Redbeard Seeds. And let's just go over these real quick. Blue Dream's going to have a sativa-like effects. It's a strain that I've chose for pure selfishness. I love a good sativa, and Blue Dream is high in THC and produces large yields both indoor and outdoor. This is going to work great for my indoor cultivation system. It leans more towards the indica side of the spectrum, but its effects as described, I think it's a strain that I would thoroughly enjoy. Grape Ape has long been one of my favorite strains, another choice out of selfishness. I remember, circa 2014, I purchased what was said to be Grape Ape from my local dealer. It was full of flavor, and now I know those are, terpenes, and you couldn't wait to smoke it. This is a high potency strain that also provides huge yields. The flowering time is only 7 to 8 weeks, which is fast compared to others that can take 9 or more. And I've recently purchased Grape Ape legally, and it definitely hits its mark with me. My third selection is Green Crack. Like Grape Ape, I originally purchased this strain illegally from my dealer around 2014. I actually heard that Snoop Dogg turned the name, but I'm unsure of the truth behind that. As you can see, another selfish choice by me. Green Crack is a sativa-dominant strain that can grow very large outdoors. It doesn't necessarily fit in well with my indoor cultivation system, but it's a strain I just have to grow. Green Crack is another high THC strain and produces well with some LST or scrog. Next, we got Captain Redbeard's Runts. Is a strain I'm not familiar with, but I believe it's newer to the cannabis world. Obviously, it's bred by Captain Redbeard himself, but Runts is becoming ever so popular. I chose this strain because, based on popularity and the Runts name alone. Luckily, I love a good sativa, and this falls in that category of leaving you euphoric and is labeled as a great anytime smoke. I'm unsure about yield size, but it does take a bit longer to finish, flowering at about 9 to 10 weeks. I can only imagine that after that length of time, you'll have some high quality buds. Lastly, I have chosen UK Cheese to grow in my indoor cultivation system. Another selfish selection. Have you noticed the trend? I have grown cheese in the past, and it's just amazing what success I've had with it indoors. Huge yields, a cheddar-like smell and taste. I wonder where the name comes from. UK Cheese has a shorter flowering period of just 60 days, and after crossing its parents from some Afghani, it will produce some high-yielding, high-potency buds. Mainly, my choices have been made out of selfishness, but I also incorporated some things like yield and potency in determining my genetics. Flowering times is really important as well. I tend to lead towards a shorter time because, shorter flowering time means more flowers more often. These strains are also said to do well indoors, which is my chosen cultivation systems, so I definitely wanted to try some heavy hitters in that department as well. I mentioned earlier on in this presentation that I don't really have any interest in breeding, but for the project we had to decide on a breeding plan. So here it is. I basically want to breed for high yields, potent buds, and to help a friend with botrytis. My buddy grows outdoors, and he's had nothing but issues over the past years with growing outdoors in Missouri, with problems with the mold. And it's, really put a damper on his whole crop many years in a row. On top of that, the deer eating his crop as well, which I guess we can't really do a ton about. I would start my process of breeding plants for this mold resistance kind of by starting, growing them in really moldy conditions, we'll say. Plants that contract mold easily would be removed to focus on those that do not. I would keep those plants and breed plants that do not mold. According to our textbook, it's very difficult to isolate specific genes to guarantee specific qualities such as resistance to mold. I would try and use back crossing to cross my plants, most widely used form of breeding, and it seems pretty simple. These plants would be subjected to conditions that influence mold. High humidity and temperature are a great combination to get the mold that we are looking for. It shouldn't be too difficult to identify this disease and should be fairly simple and quick to track. I would keep records in a journal of which plants acquired mold, how quickly, how much, and take photographs to document as to compare to my plants down the road. So the initial cross of my plants would involve a male and a female that are known to be mold resistant. I would have a sample of plants that I would subject to moldy conditions while maintaining other plants in conditions that are not prone to mold for breeding purposes. This process would involve backcrossing by crossing a recurrent parent with a donor parent. Then I would select any desirable trait and hybridize plants to the recurrent parent. Step 3 involves selecting plants from the initial backcrossing and hybridizing them into the recurrent parent. The resulting generation is denoted as backcrossing 2. In step 4, I would select plants from my second backcrossing and hybridize with the recurrent parent. This generation is denoted as backcrossing 3. And then I would expect that the more back crosses that are performed with plants that are resistant to mold, the more resistant each generation would become. Is there really even a time frame that I could put in place to determine when I would have the perfect strain? I cannot, but I guess once my plants have been exposed to some extremely moldy conditions, I guess for all intents and purposes, I would be completed with my breeding once my plants that I have exposed to the most extreme moldy conditions no longer contain any traces of mold. Finally, the way to every woman's heart, and we're going to talk about food, please. And food in this case, when it relates to my cannabis plants, is of course going to be nutrients. I have chosen to use the Fox Farm Trio. This consists of 3 different nutrients with different NPK values that are supposed to promote the plants during different stages of the plant growth cycle. The trio of nutrients are Big Bloom, Grow Big, and Tiger Bloom. I feel like with a cultivation plan of 100 plants, Fox Farm will meet my needs as they offer commercial size options, and they'll probably be pretty reasonably priced. These nutrients are offered in 5, 15, 55, and 250 gallon containers. I can't imagine ever needing a size larger than 250 gallons. I will obtain my Fox Farm fertilizer directly from Fox Farm. I feel like with 100 plants, that's a pretty significant grow, and they're sure to fill my order. I'm sure if they don't distribute directly to companies like mine, they will distribute these bulk sizes of nutrients to my local hydroponic stores. I may have to pay a little bit more to get it locally, but in the end, I think it'll all work out. I'm sticking with growing 100 plants. To do this, I would water with nutrients twice a week as per Fox Farm's feeding schedule. This equates to about 100 gallons of water if each plant is receiving around 2 quarts of water twice a week with the nutrients. Luckily, Fox Farm recommends mixing per 100 gallons, so the math is pretty simple. For Grow Big, I would need to obtain approximately 4.6 gallons of nutrients to support around a 12-week growth cycle. Big Bloom would require me to secure about 18.75 gallons to support a growth cycle of 12 weeks. And finally, we have Tiger Bloom, which is going to require me also to acquire 4.6 gallons of fertilizer to support a 12-week growth cycle. Obviously, with these figures, I am assuming that I am using the recommended amount that Fox Farm lists on their website, which means all 3 nutrients will be used together throughout the entire growth cycle. I generated these estimates by visiting the Fox Farm website and looking up how much fertilizer is required per 100 gallons for each of the nutrients I have specified. The best way for me to get my fertilizer to my plants is an old-fashioned garden sprayer. Watering will be required at least every other day of the week, and as far as equipment goes, I will need many 2-gallon garden sprayers, just a little space to store the nutrients and sprayers. Labor is probably going to be the most expensive aspect of achieving this delivery method. The more people, the merrier, but we have to stop somewhere. So for math's sake, I will have 10 people that are in charge of watering. This will be about 10 plants per person on watering days, only 5 sprayer bottles per person, and water will need to be kept in a reservoir and pre-mixed with the nutrients daily. So we'll probably have a water guy is what we'll call him, or the water boy, for instance. In a perfect world, I will have all the time and resources available to me that I could ever need. I would like to start a crop that I could feed half of the plants Fox Farm Trio and the other half without, document, photograph individual plants and compare them overall. It wouldn't be that difficult of a process if the conditions remain the same and the only thing I'm changing is the nutrients. This would allow for a very accurate measurement after harvest, and I would, look at the dry cannabis, compare things like density and weight, and many other factors, and see if the nutrients are actually worth the time and effort, and most importantly, money. I suspect in the end that they will be. This information could certainly help me determine if this line of nutrients is right for me. I may have to go try another brand or regimen in order to fully grasp the concept. It could take many growth cycles, or I could always divide the number of plants into smaller groups. The possibilities truly are endless for studying nutrients and the plant's reactions to them. So I know this went much longer than anticipated. I'm sorry, but there was a lot to cover. And basically, in case you missed it, I'm going with an indoor cultivation system. I'm going seeds, seeds, seeds all day. Hard in the paint on seeds, starting over every grow cycle, which I'm pretty stoked about because I'll be able to get many different strains and try and cherry pick my favorites over time while high stress training, possibly some topping to maximize the yields, purchasing all photos to try and make things a little bit simpler on me instead of having some photos and some autos or requiring different light cycles and whatnot. All from Captain Redbeard Seeds. I've had success with them in the past. Pretty stoked to support, a smaller breeder. And then as far as breeding goes for me, I'd be breeding for a friend, trying to help maximize yields, increase potency, but also stop things like botrytis from affecting his outdoor grows. And then, lastly, getting the plants the nutrients that they need to thrive. The Fox Farm Trio, the 3 different bottles of stuff, all purchasable in huge quantities directly from Fox Farm. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll do my best to answer what I can. Like I said, my name is Mark Walter. Really stoked to have finished this course and ready to move on. Thanks.